Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been part of the local Air Cadet Squadron for about 2 years now. It's something I really love doing, the discipline, the training, the sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening I spend 3 hours learning everything from drill movements to survival skills. My dad has always been supportive, driving me there and back since I'm only 16 and don't have my license yet. The squadron meets at a community center that shares its parking lot with a dance studio and a daycare. It's usually pretty busy in the evenings, with parents dropping off and picking up their kids. The parking lot isn't the best, it's small, poorly lit, and in winter it gets really icy since they don't salt it properly. 2 weeks ago, I was leaving after another intense training session. We'd spent the evening practicing ceremonial drill, which meant my uniform had to be perfect. I'd spent over an hour at home making sure every crease was sharp, every button polished, and my boots were spotless. In Air Cadets, your appearance is taken seriously, and I take pride in looking professional. The parking lot was covered in a thin layer of ice from the freezing rain we'd had earlier. I was walking carefully, looking down to make sure I didn't slip and mess up my uniform. My dad was waiting in his car at the far end of the lot. That's when Karen came flying into the parking lot like she was racing in the Indianapolis 500. I heard the engine roaring and tires squealing, but by the time I looked up, her car was heading straight for me. I had maybe 2 seconds to react before she would have flattened me. I threw myself to the side, landing hard on the icy pavement. My perfectly pressed uniform was now covered in slush and dirt. My knee was scraped up, and my hat had gone flying into a puddle. Karen screeched to a halt and jumped out of her car. Instead of asking if I was okay or apologizing, she immediately started screaming at me. She yelled that I should have been looking where I was going and asked what was wrong with me. She called me a little piece of garbage and said I could have damaged her car. That's when my dad came running over. He'd seen the whole thing from where he was parked. He couldn't believe she was yelling at me when she had come into the parking lot going at least 60 kilometers per hour. He told her there were children and families around and that she could have killed someone. He asked if she was completely out of her mind. Karen snapped back that she was late for a party and needed to pick up her kid first. She said she was running behind schedule and told my dad and me to go to hell. My dad's face turned red. I'd never seen him this angry before. He repeated that she could have killed someone and asked what part of that she didn't understand. I could see other parents starting to stare at us. I felt embarrassed and just wanted the whole situation to go away. I quietly told my dad that I didn't want any trouble and suggested we just let it go. I said she probably wouldn't do it again. We walked back to our car and I spent the next week fixing my uniform and hoping I wouldn't run into her again. The following Tuesday, I was extra careful leaving the building. I stayed close to the parked cars, thinking that would keep me safe from any crazy drivers. My dad was running a few minutes late, so I was waiting near the entrance. Then I saw her car coming into the parking lot again, way too fast. But this time, when she saw me, she didn't try to avoid me. She turned her wheel and came straight at me. On purpose. I dove out of the way again, landing even harder this time. My newly repaired uniform was ruined once more, and this time I scraped my hands as well as my knee. Karen didn't even get out of her car this time. She just reversed, rolled down her window, and shouted that maybe next time I would be more careful about where I stood. That was it. I was done being polite. I got up, looked her right in the eye, and gave her the biggest middle finger I could manage. Then I ran back into the building to find one of the officers. My friend had seen the whole thing this time and followed me inside. He told me that woman was completely insane and that she had tried to hit me on purpose. I found one of the adult officers who helps run our squadron. She's a former military police officer, so she doesn't mess around when it comes to safety. I explained that there was a woman in the parking lot who had just tried to run me over and that this was the second time she had done it. The officer told me to stay inside and said she was calling the police right away. I called my dad and told him what happened. He said he was almost there and that he was going to handle this once and for all. The police arrived pretty quickly. Karen was still sitting in her car waiting for her kid to come out of dance class. When she saw the police car, her first instinct was to try to drive away as fast as possible. That's when karma really kicked in. Karen backed up so fast that she lost control of her car. She crashed straight into a light pole and almost sideswiped another parent's car. The impact was loud enough that everyone in the parking lot stopped to look. The police officers got out and immediately arrested her. She was screaming and cursing the whole time, blaming everyone but herself. She kept saying it was ridiculous and that I had been in her way. She complained that she had places to be. One of the officers told her to calm down and explained that she was being arrested for reckless driving and attempted assault. The officers talked to me, my dad, my friend, and several other witnesses. Everyone confirmed that Karen had been driving dangerously and had deliberately tried to hit me the second time. About 20 minutes later, Karen's husband showed up to pick up their kid. I actually knew him from around town. He's a really nice guy who volunteers at the local food bank. I felt terrible for him and their kid. They didn't deserve to deal with Karen's crazy behavior. The husband apologized for his wife's behavior. He said she had been under a lot of stress lately, but admitted that was no excuse for what she had done. My dad acknowledged that the kid and husband weren't the problem, but pointed out that Karen could have seriously hurt me. The police officer came over to talk to us about pressing charges. He explained that given her behavior that night and the fact that she had outstanding warrants, they could charge her with reckless endangerment, attempted assault, and hit and run. He asked what we wanted to do. My dad and I talked it over. I didn't want to make things worse for her family, especially her kid and husband, who seemed like good people. I said I didn't think we needed to press charges because she was already in enough trouble. My dad asked if I was sure, reminding me that she could have killed me. I told him I was sure and that she had learned her lesson. We decided not to press charges that night. Karen was taken away by the police and her husband took their kid home. But over the next few days, I kept thinking about what had happened. What if Karen did this to someone else? What if next time she actually hurt someone? I talked to my parents about it over dinner a few days later. My mom said she thought I should reconsider pressing charges. She pointed out that this woman had tried to hurt me twice and asked what would happen if she did it to another kid. My dad agreed with my mom. He said we had been trying to be nice to her family, but Karen needed to learn that actions have results. I asked if they really thought we should press charges. My dad said he thought it was the right thing to do, not just for us, but for everyone else who might encounter her. So we called the police and decided to press charges after all. It turns out Karen already had several warrants for similar incidents. She'd been doing this kind of thing to other people too. The last I heard, she was looking at some serious jail time. Her husband filed for divorce and got full custody of their kid. I worked part-time at a local coffee shop for almost 2 years, saving up every penny I could spare. At 17, I didn't have many expenses, but I also didn't make much money. My dream was to visit London for my 18th birthday, which was coming up in a few weeks. I've been planning this 3-day trip for months, researching all the places I wanted to see and carefully budgeting every detail. The trip cost me nearly everything I'd saved. I had to book the cheapest accommodation I could find and plan my meals carefully to make sure I wouldn't run out of money. But there was one thing I wouldn't compromise on: my bus seat. I get terrible motion sickness, especially on long journeys, so I paid extra for a window seat where I could get fresh air if needed. That extra 20 pounds was a lot for me, but I knew it was worth it to avoid spending the entire 2-hour journey feeling sick. The morning of my departure, I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I arrived at the bus station early, double-checked my ticket, and made sure I had everything I needed for the journey. When they called for boarding, I found my row number and walked down the aisle with my small backpack. That's when I saw them. A woman in her 30s was sitting in the aisle seat, and her son, who was about 8 years old, was sprawled across both the middle and window seats, my seat. The kid was lying down with his feet up on the window, taking up the entire space I'd paid extra for. I stood there for a moment, not quite sure how to handle this. I'd never really had to deal with a confrontation like this before. I politely asked the child if he could sit up because I thought he was in my seat. The woman, let's call her Karen, immediately jumped in without even looking at me. She told me that her child could lie down, and if he wanted to lie down, he could. My cheeks got hot, but I tried to stay polite. I explained that I understood, but I had paid for the window seat and asked if she could please have him sit up so I could sit down. Karen told me to go sit somewhere else. I looked around the bus. It was nearly full, and there weren't any other window seats available. Even if there were, I'd paid specifically for this one. I apologized but said I couldn't do that. I explained that I had paid extra for this specific seat because I get travel sick and really needed to sit there. Karen said that was my problem and told me to find another seat. The kid just stared at me with this smug little grin, making no effort to move. I could feel other passengers starting to look at us, and I was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. I'd never been good with confrontation, and I was starting to feel that familiar churning in my stomach that meant my motion sickness was already beginning. I decided I needed help, so I walked to the back of the bus where I'd seen a staff member earlier. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face, and he listened patiently when I explained the situation. The staff member said he would come have a look. We walked back to my row together, and I pointed out the problem. I showed him my seat number and explained that I had paid extra for the window seat because I get motion sickness. The staff member looked at my ticket, then at Karen and her son. He told them that he would need the son to move so I could sit in my assigned seat. Karen asked why her son should move and said I could just sit where she was sitting. The staff member explained that passengers needed to sit in their assigned seats and that I had paid extra for the window seat. I repeated that I really did get travel sick and needed to be by the window in case I needed fresh air. Karen huffed and rolled her eyes dramatically, but finally nudged her son to sit up. The kid moved with the slowest, most exaggerated movements possible, clearly trying to show how annoyed he was. I quickly slipped into my window seat, put my bag under the seat in front of me, and plugged my headphones into my phone before sliding it into my pocket. The bus finally started moving. About 10 minutes into what was supposed to be a peaceful 2-hour journey, Karen leaned toward me. She asked if her child could play on my phone. I grinned a little at the audacity of the question. I told her no. Her face went through about 5 different expressions of shock and outrage, like she had never heard someone tell her precious child no. She leaned over and whispered something in her son's ear. I didn't hear what she said, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. Sure enough, after about 10 seconds, the kid started whining. He kept saying he wanted to play on my phone and demanding that I let him. I told him no and asked him to please stop bothering me, but he kept going, getting louder and more persistent. My stomach was already starting to feel queasy from the bus ride, and the constant whining was making it worse. I put on my headphones and turned up my music, hoping they'd get the hint and leave me alone. Another 10 minutes passed, and I saw Karen whisper something else in her son's ear. This time he grinned like he'd just been given permission to do something he really wanted to do. I should have paid more attention to that grin. I was trying to focus on my music and the scenery outside the window when I felt something moving in my pocket. I turned just in time to see the kid's hand pulling my phone out of my pocket. He'd actually reached over and tried to steal it right from my pocket. I yelled at him to give me my phone back right away. Karen screamed that if her child wanted my phone, he could have it. My stomach was turning worse now, partly from motion sickness and partly from stress. I reached over to open the window for some fresh air. The commotion had attracted the attention of the same staff member from before, and he came over to see what was happening. He asked what was going on. Karen immediately accused me of trying to steal her son's phone, calling me a little witch. That's when it happened. The combination of motion sickness, stress, and pure outrage finally got to me, and I threw up all over the kid. Karen looked absolutely horrified and immediately pulled her son away from me. The staff member asked me what had actually happened and why I had tried to steal the boy's phone. I explained that I hadn't tried to steal anything and that it was my phone. The kid had taken it from my pocket. I told him I could prove it was mine. The staff member took the phone from the kid, and I signed into it right in front of him. I showed him my personal photos, my messages, everything that proved it belonged to me. The staff member told Karen that she needed to get her child under control and handed her a towel to clean him up. The staff member arranged for Karen and her son to swap seats was a nice older couple who had been sitting a few rows back. The couple was very sympathetic and even chatted with me about how badly Karen and her son had behaved. For a moment, I thought my ordeal was finally over, but it wasn't. The older couple had left their bags at Karen's old seats, and Karen had left some of her things at theirs. While they were sorting out their belongings, I was texting my mom about what had happened when suddenly my phone was gone again. I looked up to see Karen standing in the aisle, holding my phone above her head. She screamed that if her son couldn't have my phone, then I couldn't either. Before I could react, she threw my phone right out the open window. I watched in horror as my phone with all my photos, my music, my contact information, and my travel plans disappeared into the countryside. I sat there completely stunned, feeling like I was about to cry. This phone wasn't just expensive for someone like me, it had everything important to me on it. When I started to get up, Karen shoved me back into my seat hard. Then she slapped me across the face. Within seconds, the staff member had grabbed Karen and was restraining her. Her son stood there looking absolutely terrified at what his mother had just done. The bus pulled over to the side of the road, and the driver called the police. It took about 5 minutes for a police car to arrive. Several passengers came forward to give witness statements about what they'd seen. Karen and her son were escorted off the bus and into separate police cars. One of the officers came over to talk to me. He asked if I wanted to press charges against the woman. I immediately said yes, absolutely. The officer took my statement and gave me information about how to follow up on the case. He also gave me the contact information for victim services to help me get compensation for my destroyed phone. After everything was sorted out and the police cars had left, the bus continued on to London. The other passengers were incredibly kind to me for the rest of the journey. Several people offered to let me use their phones to call my parents and let them know what had happened. I found out later that Karen was charged with assault, theft, and destruction of property. She ended up having to pay for a replacement phone plus additional compensation for what I'd been through. I heard that she also spent some time in jail. But the thing I'll never forget is the look on her face when the police officer put her in the back of that police car. All that entitlement and rage had completely disappeared, replaced by the sudden realization that her actions actually had results. For someone who clearly thought the world revolved around her and her son, reality had hit pretty hard. My London trip ended up being amazing despite the terrible start. We live in an old manor house that's about 150 years old. The whole building was split into 3 separate homes, and we live in one of them. What makes our property special are these massive giant sequoia trees that were planted around the same time the house was built. We have 2 of them in our garden. In the UK, these trees are incredibly rare, and having them adds about £60,000 to our property value. For years, we had wonderful neighbors on both sides. There was a young couple on one side and this sweet elderly couple on the other. We all got along great and even shared chickens between our properties. Everything changed when the elderly couple passed away. Their daughter and her family moved into the house, and from day one she was a nightmare. She was Karen. At first, Karen seemed okay with continuing the chicken sharing arrangement we'd had with her parents, but she was completely irresponsible about it. On her nights to take care of them, she'd constantly forget to lock them up properly. We ended up having to check on them every single night anyway because we couldn't trust her to do it right. Then things got worse. Her kids thought it would be hilarious to open our personal duck pen one night. The next morning we found a massacre. Our poor ducks had been slaughtered by foxes that got in through the open pen. A few weeks later the same thing happened to our chickens. Karen just shrugged it off and said, "Kids will be kids." The real drama started about 2 years ago when we had a terrible storm. One of Karen's sequoia trees fell over and died. I actually felt bad for them because I know how devastating that must have been. These trees are irreplaceable, and losing one is heartbreaking. That's when Karen's jealousy kicked in. She started complaining constantly about how unfair it was that we still had 2 beautiful sequoias while she had lost hers. She kept saying our tree was casting too much shade on her garden, which wasn't even true. Our tree was nowhere near her property line. She would come over and rant about how our tree was blocking all the sunlight from her garden, and how it wasn't fair that we got to keep both of ours when hers was gone. I tried explaining that the tree wasn't actually blocking her sunlight since it was on the other side of our property, but she would argue that it felt like it was, and maybe the next storm would take care of it for her. She started making these passive-aggressive threats all the time. She'd say things like how maybe she should just chop it down herself, or how she hoped the next big storm would knock it over. We thought she was just being dramatic and venting her frustration. We decided to take a 2-week holiday to France to get away from all the negativity. When we came back, what I saw was unbelievable. Our beautiful, ancient sequoia tree was gone. Completely gone. All that was left was a huge stump about 6 meters wide. My mom and sisters started crying immediately. My dad turned bright red. Not only was our precious tree gone, but 2 of our old British oak trees had been crushed when it fell. The damage to our garden was devastating. Karen came over with this fake, concerned expression on her face. She told us how sorry she was about our tree and explained that they'd had such a terrible storm while we were away. She claimed our tree had come down and damaged her fence and shed, and the tree service said it had to be removed immediately for safety reasons. My dad asked her what storm she was talking about because we'd checked the weather reports and there was no storm. She insisted there had definitely been bad weather. Then she handed us a bill for the damage to her property that totaled £8,000. She actually had the nerve to hand us a bill for damages to her property. Meanwhile, we'd lost a tree worth more than our house and had no idea how she'd managed to remove a 100-foot tree so quickly. Getting rid of a tree that size should have taken weeks and cost a fortune. We had a security camera at the front of the house, but someone could easily access our back garden by going through the fields behind our property. We had no proof that Karen had done anything wrong, and she kept insisting it was storm damage. 2 weeks passed, and we felt completely helpless. We were devastated about losing our tree and couldn't figure out how to prove what really happened. Then my dad came running into the house from the garden, practically shouting with excitement. He told us he'd found the proof we needed. We'd completely forgotten about a wildlife camera we'd installed a few months earlier to watch the animals in our garden. Dad had finally remembered to check the footage, and it had captured everything. The video showed Karen's husband and a tree removal crew cutting down our healthy tree in broad daylight. There was no storm, no emergency, nothing. They just decided to steal our tree while we were away. We immediately called a lawyer and started planning our revenge. We also brought in a tree specialist to assess the damage. What he told us was incredible. The tree specialist explained that this was an original specimen brought to the UK in 1860. There were only about 218 of these trees planted in Britain originally, and now there are only about 60 left. This tree was historically significant. He also recommended we call an engineer to check our foundation because the tree's massive root system might have been supporting part of our house's structure. Sure enough, the engineer told us our worst fears were true. The engineer told us that the roots were integrated into our foundation. When they rotted away, we'd need to completely redo the foundation work. This was going to be extremely expensive. We took Karen to court and sued her for property damage, trespassing, and several other charges. The numbers were staggering. To replace a 200-year-old sequoia would cost £250,000, assuming you could even find one. The foundation work would be another £200,000. The 2 oak trees she destroyed were worth another £25,000. With all the smaller claims, we were looking at about £500,000 in damages. Karen's lawyer took one look at our wildlife camera footage and basically told her she had no chance of winning. He advised her to settle immediately because the evidence was overwhelming. When we showed Karen and her legal team the video footage, she gave up completely. She knew she was caught red-handed. The tree removal company felt so bad about what had happened that they offered to make our kitchen countertops and dining table from the wood of our destroyed sequoia free of charge. They explained that they'd been lied to about having permission to cut down the tree and were genuinely sorry for their part in it. Karen and her family had to sell their house to pay the settlement. Apparently they had a second home somewhere else, so they just moved there permanently. We actually felt a little bad for her parents, who have been such wonderful neighbors. We still visit their graves sometimes because they really were like family to us. With the settlement money, we paid off our entire mortgage and did a complete renovation of our house. We added a beautiful loft conversion, redid the kitchen, and landscaped the entire garden. We even planted a new 60-year-old sequoia in the back garden to start growing a replacement for what we lost. Our new neighbors are an absolutely lovely family with kids, and we're back to sharing chickens, ducks, and even pygmy goats. I make good money babysitting their children, and it feels like we have that wonderful community atmosphere again. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.